Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Hey guys. Hello. Hope you're all doing well. My name's Connor. If you're new, I like to learn about things usually with you guys. Preemptive like. Armchair Historian, fantastic channel. Operation Sea Lion is the planned invasion of Nazi Germany to invade Great Britain. I'm not sure if it's going to be what if they succeeded or what if it just took place in a large manner. You know what I mean? Which neither happened, obviously. Let's get into it. Ready to learn?
September 19th, 1941. Soldiers of Germany's 16th Army cling to the sides of a barge as it sails through the waters of the English Channel. On their flanks, hundreds of craft float to the shore. As their swaying barge approaches at an agonizing pace, sudden explosions ring out as nearby boats strike naval mines. Soldiers leap into the surf, facing a gauntlet of obstacles and machine gun fire. Some are cut down before reaching the sand. The rest press onward. Their destination, London. Codenamed Operation Sea Lion, the German invasion of Great Britain aimed to capture the south of England and seize London, knocking the British out of the war early before turning east. Planning for the operation relied on a German victory after Dunkirk and on winning the Battle of Britain. The complexities of a cross-channel invasion forced Adolf Hitler to depend on the Luftwaffe for air superiority. The Kriegsmarine's relative weakness to the Royal Navy and the need to protect a fleet carrying tens of thousands of troops required the German Air Force to play a critical role. The Luftwaffe would need to transport supplies and deploy the Fallschirmjäger, its elite paratroopers, to break British defenses and ease the landing force's approach to shore.
So I'm assuming it wouldn't take place, we're at 132, at the Cliffs of Dover, right? Just because why would you try and land at a place where you have this enormous obstacle to have to get your troops over? So I'm assuming Armchair Historian used this picture just because it looks cool and it's iconic. But I wonder just how far these types of cliffs stretch on the southern English coast, mainly southeastern English coast, you know?
Landing force's approach to shore. The Kriegsmarine would serve in an auxiliary role, creating an undersea blockade to choke the UK's supply lines. In the lead-up to the invasion, the Navy planned to seal the channel and ferry the ground forces to the beachheads. A critical shortage of landing craft meant German planners pressed into service any ship they could find among defeated foes or allies. Shallow-drafted barges and cargo ships would make up most of the landing craft. By August, they had secured 1,900 barges, 168 merchant ships, 386 tugs and trawlers, and 1,600 motorboats. The plan called for the Wehrmacht to follow the Reich's planes and paratroopers. However, it had little experience with contested amphibious landings. Commanders would have to devise tactics and engineer equipment to surmount the geographic and military challenges soldiers faced landing on the beaches. German engineers would be rigging panzers to wade and crawl through the tide to reach the beaches and protect the infantry, all amidst the hail of enemy gunfire. War planners divided the invasion into 3 echelons.
Even if you're able to protect the engine and exhaust with it being water sealed, the places you need it, I wonder how a tank would do in terms of moving when it's underwater and moving on sand. Is it heavy enough that it would really be able to gain traction? I wonder.
Gunfire. War planners divided the invasion into 3 echelons: a landing force of 10 infantry divisions, a follow-up wave of artillery and tanks, and a third wave of infantry reserves. In total, they expected 260,000 men would be needed to execute the invasion. Commanders selected beaches along the channel's rocky cliffs and shores, hoping that diversionary movements toward East Anglia might draw British troops and defenses east, away from the true landing zones. Once ashore, German forces were to press northward to London and secure southern England. But a cross-channel invasion favored the British defenders. Sea and weather patterns made German movements predictable. British coastal defenses, including spotters, patrol planes, and ships, remained on high alert. The defenders held the numerical advantage and were fighting on home soil, with prepared defenses and pre-positioned troops. Britain didn't hold all the cards, however. After escaping from Dunkirk, the army was disorganized and downtrodden. The Home Guard was undertrained and, like their army counterparts, under-equipped. British commanders did not know which beaches the German High Command selected for landing. Sea Lion called for a broad landing front, stretching from east of Brighton to the west of Dover, before converging northward.
I'm assuming that you would want places, so putting yourself in the enemy's shoes, if you're British, in the German shoes, you'd want to pick a place that isn't too directly close to London, and also is somewhat easy to land the troops and doesn't have too many shore obstacles. So, because the big idea with Normandy was you wanted to divert enough and just get as much people on the shore as quickly as possible, so that you're not just continually shipping people into a place that's already known about, right? Because, you know what I'm trying to say? And so you could kind of narrow it down, right? It's, where is there reasonably low geographic barriers, and that is kind of close to London, but not too close. And you could kind of narrow it down to those spots, I think.
By September 15,
What do I know?
Hitler decided to strike a decisive blow against the United Kingdom. The Luftwaffe had overcome British air defenses and driven the RAF from the skies. Radar stations were destroyed, airfields rendered unusable, and Britain's fighter reserves depleted. Germany had won the Battle of Britain, but the British refused to surrender. Hitler faced a determined enemy, unwilling to yield despite its losses. Chief of the Luftwaffe High Command, Hermann Göring, ordered a final push. Bombers targeted RAF radar stations, airfields, factories, and arsenals. With air superiority allegedly secured, Hitler felt ready to commence Sea Lion. In our real timeline, any hope Germany had of successfully invading Great Britain hinged on accurate intelligence, but their plans quickly unraveled.
Advertisement, guys. Fast forward if you want to, but I'm going to watch through Armchair Historian's sponsor here.
Or defected, feeding disinformation back to German command. In a digital age, online threats work much the same way. Unseen, deceptive, and potentially dangerous. That's where today's sponsor, NordVPN, the world's leading cybersecurity platform, comes in. Just like British intelligence helped turn the tide in the Second World War, NordVPN's Threat Protection Pro helps keep you one step ahead. It detects at least 85% of phishing websites, making it the only VPN app certified by independent testers as an anti-phishing tool. And the best part? You don't even have to connect to a VPN server. Threat Protection Pro runs automatically in the background, scanning websites as you browse and blocking malicious ones before they can do any damage. What really stands out to me is how it goes beyond phishing. Threat Protection Pro also blocks malicious ads, stops access to malware hosting sites, and even scans downloaded files, removing infected ones before they ever touch your device. It's been rigorously tested and trusted by top cybersecurity labs like AV Comparatives, AV Test, and West Coast Labs. Try NordVPN completely risk-free with their 30-day money-back guarantee, and if you sign up for a 2-year plan, you'll get 4 extra months free. Just click the link in the description below or visit nordvpn.com/historyvpn to start protecting yourself today.
Oh.
Planners faced difficult trade-offs, rushing the invasion while air defenses were weak, or delaying and risking the recovery of the RAF. American aid further complicated matters. British colonies and the US sent food, fuel, and materiel, mainly via the Cash and Carry program. But Germany did have some factors working in its favor. The Kriegsmarine was fortunate that the Royal Navy did not destroy the anchored fleet at Mer el-Kabir, which would bolster German naval strength. The Channel's waters were also unusually calm during September 1940, alleviating fears of capsizing. For their part, the Royal Navy was stretched thin. It had to defend the home islands and shield the vital sea lanes that supplied its war effort and fed its people. Moreover, the Navy was committed to fighting the Germans and Italians in the Mediterranean. Submarine warfare took its toll on British shipping and warships. And while the formidable Royal Navy had proven...
just threatening Britain with the possibility of a sea invasion would mean that they'd have to carry take some personnel and ships away from other areas like the Mediterranean, right? So even if you didn't intend on actually invading Britain, making it look like you might could take a lot of people up from other places that you're fighting, right?
Could endure Axis air attacks, German bombers had begun... Warfare took its toll on British shipping and warships. And while the formidable Royal Navy had proven it could endure Axis air attacks, German bombers had begun adopting more effective anti-ship tactics. But their success was not guaranteed. Despite these unresolved challenges, Hitler chose to press forward with the invasion. Operation Sea Lion was scheduled to commence in the fall of 1940. On September 19th, the invasion force was poised to strike across the channel. German soldiers herded onto the flotilla of watercraft and ships. Luftwaffe fighters, bombers, and transport planes roared overhead in the early morning hours, north and east. Anxious soldiers crouched in the cramped barges, watching transport planes loaded with paratroopers streak across the sky. If the airborne troops broke the British lines, little would stand between them and London. As German planes approached, RAF patrol aircraft and the Royal Navy picket ships detected them and quickly alerted British command. Within minutes, anti-aircraft batteries opened fire, lighting up the sky. Then, from their hidden airfields, the last squadrons of RAF fighters, conserved for this moment, tore into the German formations, downing vulnerable transports. British troops and the Home Guard met paratroopers who made it to the ground, many still untangling their parachutes as they came under fire. With the airborne assault collapsing on contact, sabotage and rear area disruption never materialized. And while the skies turned against the invaders, British defenders rushed to their coastal positions, only to find another threat looming.
It's so cool. I don't know if cool is the right word. How this is not a new thing at all in the history of the British Isles. And I mean, you had the Romans for one, and then way later you could say you had the Spanish Armada, and then you had Napoleon threatening to go over the British Channel, invade, and now you have the Germans doing it. So this would be arguably like the fourth time that a large army force was planning or trying to invade over the English Channel from Europe.
Out on the water, as far as the eye could see, a vast collection of barges, trawlers, and converted merchant ships.
I'm just imagining this same picture, but with like Roman boats and Spanish ships and Napoleonic ships. I know some of them didn't reach this far, but
steamed steadily.
Barges,
trawlers, and converted merchant ships steamed steadily towards the English shore. The Royal Navy pulled its nearby fleets to defend the homeland and broke through the Axis surface fleet guarding both ends of the channel. With the Luftwaffe already fully engaged, the amphibious flotilla was exposed as British warships picked off the lumbering tugboats and barges. In confusion, German ships and boats succumbed to capsizing and mechanical breakdowns. Deviations from the course led some vessels into naval mines. The Kriegsmarine rushed after the Royal Navy, trying to keep up and protect the landing force. Meanwhile, German air cover faltered. Fighters and dive bombers cycled to rearm, leaving the fleet exposed. The heavier transports carrying tanks and artillery were caught mid-channel and sunk, while the third wave never launched. Britain had won the day. Its naval and air forces broke the invasions before it landed, and the Wehrmacht suffered devastating losses. The failure stunned Hitler. What had been envisioned as a swift knockout blow instead exposed the limits of German air and naval power. Seeking to preserve what remained of his forces, he halted further offensives and shifted to blockade tactics. But the illusion of invincibility had cracked. With divisions lost and materiel depleted, plans for invading the Soviet Union no longer seemed inevitable. Hitler still looked east, but now with hesitation.
Maybe that would have helped Germany out by not... Ironically, that actually could have made it more possible for Germany to hold out longer than it did, right? Because perhaps going so far into the Soviet Union to trying to knock them out is sort of what screwed them in the end. Cromwell.
Realizing the risks of a rushed invasion, German planners convinced Hitler that they needed to delay Sea Lion until the spring of 1941. Time worked in favor of both the invaders and defenders. Supplies flowed into the British Isles, and the defenders constructed a dense network of fortifications. The ensuing months allowed the Kriegsmarine to clear the naval mines from the channel, and the Luftwaffe to intercept mine-laying ships. American support propped up a struggling British defensive effort, though it was not enough to get the RAF fully off the ground. With unchallenged control over the skies of southern England, the landing beaches and drop zones would receive adequate Luftwaffe coverage. The RAF would have to pick and choose which areas to defend, and the Royal Navy warily conserved its strength in the face of threats from above and below. Cromwell. A single code word crackled over telephones to all British military commands on April 1st, 1941. German troops massed in northern France and boarded the landing flotilla. With a clear plan of coordinated bombings and parachute drops, German airborne troops under the command of General Kurt Studen achieved many of their objectives, demolishing bridges, cutting telephone wires, and ambushing confused Tommies during the early morning hours. Waves of aircraft swept across British positions along the shore and punched holes in shore-based and ground defenses. The potential threat of air attack made British commanders cautious and slow to respond to the oncoming danger of the German landing armada.
So obviously, for obvious reasons, this looks a lot like the Normandy D-Day assault onto Europe. But it seems like this would be much more difficult to invade Britain than to invade Europe, because one, Germany had a subdued but still somewhat hostile French population. They weren't in Germany yet, and Europe has a much longer coastline with a lot more possibilities of where the enemy could land and then mass troops and then push in, whereas with Britain you have much less choices. You're invading a home territory, not just an occupied territory, and a much smaller area where you have a lot less time and less possibilities to land and less time to, and therefore less time to amass as many troops as possible to gain a land army on the British Isles. And so I'd imagine this would be a lot more difficult than the D-Day invasions, right?
As to respond to the oncoming danger of the German landing armada. As the first wave of German infantry chugged over the horizon, some zones along the front looked secure. Others were less promising. German ships, loaded with seasick soldiers, chugged into the maelstrom. Axis troops who trudged into the surf faced a gauntlet of traps and gunfire. British artillery pillboxes and machine gun nests pushed German forces into disarray before they reached the obstacles. Barbed wire and landmines clogged the sandbars and dunes. Entrenched British soldiers and heavy guns waited. Once the Germans were in range, the defenders opened fire. Shells smashed into landing craft, and machine guns cut men down. But the chief commander of the British Home Forces, General Alan Brooke, soon realized his invasion preparations were subpar. British infantry and armored divisions were too far from the beaches to sufficiently block the oncoming tide of landing soldiers. The 10 German divisions in the first wave saw some success at remote beaches where the defenders had chosen not to contest the landings. But these troops soon encountered a second reserve line of men, tanks, and artillery. The specially designed German panzers were too few to provide consistent fire support for the infantry, and the second wave had not yet landed. The troops that landed unopposed
where are the
rushed
panzers?
to support their comrades under fire. Though reeling and falling back from some beachheads, British defenders reorganized their lines and ordered stiff resistance farther inland. To defend against further advances, General Brooke ordered a rapid counterattack with armored divisions. He hoped to contain the German forces landing on the beaches, but his counterattack failed. British armored columns struggled to reach the front. Tank commanders were disoriented, and the advancing formations were repeatedly hit from the...
I wonder if you'd want to focus on the soldiers that are most furthest into the countryside, or trying to cut off the resupply of soldiers. I'm not sure how easy that would be. I'm kind of saying just do that, but I don't know the circumstances. I don't know which you would want to prioritize.
Counterattack failed. British armored columns struggled to reach the front. His counterattack failed. British armored columns struggled to reach the front. Tank commanders were disoriented, and the advancing formations were repeatedly hit from the air. Meanwhile, a second wave of Luftwaffe planes drove into the British positions and warships. Stuka dive bombers blasted trenches and pillboxes, but anti-aircraft guns shrieked back, and reserve RAF squadrons desperately scrambled to intercept any dive bombers and fighters they could reach. Chaos raged along the beaches and cliffs of southern England. Complicating matters, small groups of Royal Navy warships broke through the defensive patterns on the western edges of the channel. They steamed at full speed toward the heavily loaded landing ships and reserve waves. Scattered elements of the British fleet pounced on every German vessel they could reach. While those Axis craft caught out in the open suffered heavy losses, over half of the second and third waves managed to land successfully. The Luftwaffe scrambled to harry the British warships and slow down the pace of their attacks on the Wehrmacht landing forces. The Royal Navy pulled back as squadron after squadron buzzed over the defending battle groups. The RAF followed suit, retreating to conserve its planes and pilots. Once the waterways were clear, General Franz Halder, in charge of planning and commander of the invasion, ordered the ground divisions to be reinforced by sea and air. The Wehrmacht pushed forward into the teeth of the British defenses. But unlike in France or Poland, where blitzkrieg tactics outmaneuvered and stunned the enemy, the many obstacles and sheer mass of defending forces in a relatively compact front blunted their usual effectiveness. The Germans still made progress northward, but at great cost. Replenishing losses was difficult across the channel. Getting fuel and food to fight on became increasingly complicated as the Royal Navy and RAF targeted supply ships and aircraft over several weeks of fighting. By the winter of 1941, the invasion settled into a stalemate, still kilometers away from London. Though seasoned in combined arms warfare, German forces met unrelenting resistance. For every trench taken or position overrun, another lay behind it. The defenders quickly adapted to the Wehrmacht's tactics, developing a defense-in-depth strategy to exhaust German troops. As the fighting dragged on, neither the British government nor Hitler saw this status quo as sustainable. Parliament called for a vote of no confidence in Winston Churchill, and his replacement, Edward Wood, Lord Halifax, opened negotiations with the Germans. The result was a fragile armistice. Britain agreed to recognize Germany's continental gains, while Hitler ordered his troops to withdraw from English soil.
Interesting.
The Wehrmacht was drained, its supply lines strained, and its aura of invincibility broken. Yet Hitler pressed ahead, determined to secure victory against the Bolsheviks. He redirected his battered forces eastward. Operation Barbarossa.
I never thought of that possibility of a conclusion where the Germans don't gain a full control over the British, but the British also don't fully repel them, and an agreement saying, all right, you leave your troops and we'll recognize and stop fighting you in Europe, which would be a huge win for the Germans. Almost as good as just. Would that essentially mean that that Britain is like, all right, we're out of the war completely? Because if you're saying we'll acknowledge what you're doing in Europe, I mean,
was rescheduled for the spring of.
And I wonder if that would ever happen, because
1942. Operation Barbarossa was rescheduled for the spring of 1942. Meanwhile, Britain, though bloodied, began to rearm. Both sides prepared for the next phase of the war. If Operation Sea Lion had been launched, a German defeat might have derailed the Reich's ambitions to wage war on the USSR indefinitely. Perhaps another period of the phony war would simmer, with each side warily eyeing and probing the other. A German victory, however, could have changed everything. With Britain wounded, the Americans isolated, and the Soviets vulnerable, it remains to be seen how far Hitler's fortunes might have gone.
With hindsight, guy, great video. I'm not sure what would be more likely for German to win in World War II. If they were successful in Operation Sea Lion or unsuccessful. Because you might think, like, obviously if they were successful, but then they would definitely invade the Soviet Union again. And who knows if the same thing doesn't happen again, that a reinforced Soviet Union by like American supplies and whatnot, maybe you're still not able to win. But if you lose and it's a complete failure, your invasion of Britain, then maybe you decide to scrap completely Operation Barbarossa and your plan to invade the Soviet Union and just try and solidify your control on the continent or continue a phony war. With, in hindsight, that might mean Nazi Germany doesn't fall because it doesn't invade the Soviet Union and it just kind of solidifies control in Europe. You know what I mean? Do you get my question there? Very interesting video. Again, I would imagine it would be much more difficult, Operation Sea Lion, than the Normandy invasion, because you're invading a place where this is the final front for the British, and so all manpower of Britain will be funneled to defend this, rather than being in Europe where the invasions of Normandy, you had the Soviets still in lock fighting with you had the Germans still fighting the Soviets, and so you couldn't put all of your men over to fight a Normandy invasion, you know? And so, one, I think it would be much more difficult to invade Britain than to invade Europe, as I'm saying again, like for the fourth time. And two, I wonder if a failed invasion, sufficient enough to where Germany now didn't want to attack the Soviet Union, but still Britain couldn't come and face up against, Britain and America couldn't come in and fight like they did at Normandy. I wonder if that actually, with hindsight, would have been a better result for the Germans in somehow keeping power in Europe, because they would just solidify rather than make the huge gamble of invading the Soviet Union. You get what I mean? Maybe. Maybe a lot more effort would go into Northern African fighting. I don't know. Very interesting topic. Great video from Armchair Historian as always. Hope everyone is doing well. Would appreciate any comments down below. Let me know if you think I was wrong answering any of my questions. You guys are always great with that. And hopefully I'll see you guys next time. We'll keep on learning. Bye, guys.